My name is Captain Andrew Peterson, and tonight I am telling you about a night I have never escaped, a night that followed me home through airports and bedrooms and quiet American streets, because sometimes the people who change us the most are not the ones who wear our uniform or speak our language, but the ones we meet for only a few minutes in the middle of chaos and whose faces we carry for the rest of our lives. And this story is about a young man named Farid, who was not American, who was not a soldier, who was not even supposed to be on our radar that night, and yet he became one of the most important people I ever met. And I want you to imagine a village in eastern Afghanistan under a moon so thin it barely existed, a place where mud walls leaned tired against time, and children slept, unaware that the world could be violent because nobody had taught them that lesson yet. And our patrol had been walking for hours, dust thick in our boots, radios whispering codes into our ears when the first crack split the silence. Not a full firefight, not a storm of bullets, just a single shot echoing off stone like a warning from the dark. And in that moment, training took over, and we moved fast into cover hearts pounding, not with fear, but with awareness. Because fear comes later after everything is over. And then we heard screaming, not from one of our own, but from inside the village. High-panicked human, screaming that does not belong to a soldier, and we followed it against instinct, because instincts tell you to survive, not to investigate, but leadership means choosing responsibility over safety. And when we reached the source, we found a young local man collapsed in the dirt, blood soaking through his shirt, his eyes wide with terror and confusion, and beside him a woman, maybe his sister or his wife or his mother, crying his name over and over again. And our interpreter knelt beside him, shouting questions that came back in broken answers. Farid had been caught in crossfire while running home after work. He was 20, maybe younger, thin hands, soft palms, not a fighter, not a threat, just a boy who had stepped into the wrong night, at the wrong moment. And as my medic worked to stop the bleeding, Farid's eyes locked onto mine. Because when you are dying, you do not search for uniforms, you search for faces. And I took his hand, because it was the only thing left to offer, and I told him in a language he could not understand that he was not alone. And his fingers closed around mine with a strength that surprised me, because bodies do not give up easily, even when everything else is falling apart, and I felt the heat of his blood on my gloves. And I remember thinking, this is not in any mission, briefing. This is not in any training manual. This is just a human being dying in front of another human being. And the radio kept buzzing with reports of enemy movement, and I could hear my men shifting positions, preparing for something bigger, but my world had narrowed to a dirt floor, a young man's fading breath, and the pressure of his hand in mine. And he said something to the interpreter, something soft, something that made the interpreter pause and swallow hard before translating. He wants you to tell his mother. He tried to come home early tonight, and in that moment the entire war became irrelevant, because wars are made of politics and borders and strategies, but suffering is made of names and faces and promises that never get a chance to be kept. And Farid began to shake, his breathing shallow, like air itself was abandoning him. And I leaned closer and said words he could not understand, but emotions he could feel. I told him that his life mattered, that someone would remember him, that he was not invisible, and when his grip loosened, it was not dramatic. There was no final gasp, no movie silence, just the slow release of tension, like a string breaking inside the world, and the woman beside him screamed a sound so raw it felt like it tore through the night itself, and I let go of his hand because it had gone cold, and for the first time since becoming a soldier, I did not know where to put my hands, because they had held something sacred, and now they were empty, and we carried Farid's body to his family, and there was nothing heroic about the way his mother touched his face, or the way his younger brother stood frozen in disbelief. Because grief does not perform for cameras, it collapses inward and leaves nothing but broken people behind. And later that night back at base, my men cleaned their weapons, checked their gear, joked softly like soldiers do to pretend the world is still logical, and I sat alone in the dark trying to wash blood from my gloves that did not want to come off, and I realized something terrifying, that I could describe every part of that mission in detail. But what haunted me was not the gunfire or the danger. It was the warmth of a stranger's hand fading inside mine. And when I came home months later, people asked me what war was like. And I talked about heat and dust and distance, because nobody wants to hear about dying boys who never wore the uniform. And yet years later, I still dream about Fareed, about the way his eyes searched for something familiar in a foreign face, and how I became that face for him at the end of his life. And this is the end scene I want you to hold on to. I am standing in my kitchen in America late at night, holding a cup of water that has gone untouched, because I am not thirsty. I am remembering a boy who never made it home, and I open my hand as if expecting to feel his grip again, and there is nothing there, only air, only memory, and I whisper a name. No one around me knows Fareed, and I realize that even in peace there are wars that never stop, and the people we lose do not disappear. They simply move into the quiet spaces inside us where they wait to be remembered.